Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing? I hope everyone is doing okay. And welcome to another edition of The Works. And I am here with Terry Michael, prominent activist in Birmingham. And yesterday I started a conversation about mass shootings in the United States. And I gave a lot of information. It was pretty long broadcast than usual, but there was a lot of information, that came out statistic wise. But today we're going to kind of give the human side, of things that's going on, and particularly in the greater Birmingham area, we had a shooting in Vestavia Hills, at a church in Vestavia Hills, that hit the national news, as well. One of the things I mentioned is that it's a great resource. It's called Gun Violence Archives, and they have a whole slew of statistical information. I mean, they just literally broke everything down. They have now. For those of you who are just joining us or didn't tune into yesterday's broadcast, Gun Violence Archives defines a mass shooting as being 4 or more people that was injured or killed in one particular setting. And it does not include the shooter, the perpetrator, or the suspect. So that's how Gun Violence Archives has defined a mass shooting. So with that being said, we have Terry Michaels here. Welcome.
Hi there. Thank you for having me.
What really brought me to reach out to you is that you mentioned something on social media that really caught my attention. Do you remember what that was?
No, not offhand.
Not offhand. It was in reference to it was in reference to the topic of discussion.
Is it about school shootings?
Yes.
The thing I get most frustrated about, and as everybody knows, I try not to overextend myself. I try to stick to education issues because that's what I have been studying for so long. So as far as the mass shootings and education goes, the one thing that is so frustrating for me is to hear leaders, whether it's in Birmingham, our state, another state, I don't care who it is. It's frustrating for me when I hear elected officials talk about how, it couldn't be avoided. There's nothing we can do about it, da, 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 da. And I'm like, I've been shouting from the rafters that yes, we can do something about it. We can make, let me back up, because they go on to say that there's no way to do this without making our schools feel like a prison. And that is the part that's really frustrating for me, because then they're like, well, we can't do it because it'll make it feel like a prison. We don't need to harden our schools. We need to, well, why? I mean, in all honesty, to reduce this violence, we need, more and better mental health services, and not only in our communities, but in our schools. We need to alleviate poverty, because a lot of the folks that tend to, use guns against someone else, are living in poverty and they don't see any other way out. It's either that or they have mental health issues, right? Those are the two biggest reasons. So they're like, we just can't fix it because those problems are too big. But the truth is we can fix our schools without making them feel like prisons. I was in Miami for several weeks. They have, oh my God, I don't even remember, maybe close to 400 schools. Maybe 200, I don't know, but it's a bunch. And the thing is that in all the schools I went to, which was nowhere near, all of them, but in every one I went to, they all had fences around the perimeter, not like right up against the school or anything, but, at a distance around the perimeter. Once school started, there was only one way in. And they would have a person standing there checking everybody out. And in Tampa, you couldn't even go to the schools without going to the district office first and getting a check, a background, basic, like real quick background check. And then they take your photo and give you an ID. Then you can go over to the school. Okay, so you could do that. Miami, what they were doing is they would just have someone there at the door checking the IDs and things like that. Then once you go in the school, into the office, there's what's called a security bubble. And quite honestly, when I was on the board of Birmingham, we voted for these security bubbles. And I don't know for sure they're happening. But what you have there is bulletproof, like plexiglass, and another set of impenetrable doors, so that someone would have to buzz them in. So that's another layer of checking who these folks are. And none of that. I did not see the children feeling like they were in a prison. There wasn't a heavy police presence. Is it 100%? No. If someone is hell bent on doing something like this, then, they may be able to find a way, even though the schools are doing their best. But the truth is, very few school systems are doing their best. And when I brought this up to a former superintendent, my ideas for making our schools safer, the sole response I got was, well, that's a lot of money. Okay, so it is, but we need to do it. And ever since that conversation with that former superintendent, there's just been more and more things happening. And so to me, it's more important now than ever. And what can happen is, just like with COVID, our federal government could earmark money for school systems to make these improvements, to only go towards, they can write a plan for the grant. We're going to do these fences. We're going to do this, this, and this. They can give the federal government, the application, and they can win that grant and get that money to make those changes. That's exactly what needs to be happening to keep our children safe. But everybody is acting like it's just impossible. And, oh, well, it's inevitable. I mean, it's going to happen. No, it's not inevitable, and it does not have to happen. There's a lot of measures we could take to make our schools safer. And to tell you the truth, even if slightly it felt a little bit like some containment or whatever, many of our children would gladly do that, because then they don't have to worry about a shooter coming in. That's a heavy worry on our children today. And they need to feel safe in their schools. They know it's not people in the school doing that, it's people coming from the outside getting into the schools. So if the children feel safe, if the employees feel safe, if they know their security's all over, and that's another thing we could do, is to hire. We made airports safer. We make our state houses safe. We make all kinds of public properties safe. It can be done. We need surveillance, like an actual security team who's not there to punish children, who's not there to enforce any of the school rules, but they're there solely to watch those monitors, to see when there's an alarm on a door going off, they can instantly look and see who's coming and going and what's happening. That can be done. Why do we act like those things can't happen? And why do we act like those things would have a negative impact?
I think that it should not matter how much, it costs. I mean, you can't really put a price tag on safety for our kids. I don't know if you remember this, but locally, a couple of years ago, you remember Courtney Arrington was yes. And was shot and killed at Huffman High School. And I came in as one of the grief counselors there, so I had an opportunity to talk to a lot of the students. And one of the things that they told me was that they had a security system there, and metal detectors there, but it was only being used during sporting events. That's it. It's only being used during sporting events, not, as an everyday security, measure. And that kind of stunned me.
Mm. Yeah. And
You know,
so I can't comment on that directly because I was on the board at the time, but in speaking generally about metal detectors in schools, um, that's not even a Band-Aid. That's like, I don't know. But that is not going to change much, because also when we're looking at, and again, I'm talking generally, not in that instance, but generally speaking, when we're using metal detectors, number one, there's all sorts of other ways to get in. It's not like you absolutely have to go through it to get in. You can walk around it. And if you got a gun in your hand, they're going to be like, whoa, So that still gives way too much access immediately to the rest of the school. And then you're running into, if you're not going to pay security people to handle things like metal detectors, whether they be wands or walkthrough or whatever. I mean, it's not fair to pass that on to our employees. I really appreciate the teachers and other staff members that come in early or stay, for games and things like that to do those metal detectors. I really appreciate that. And you can say barely that it's better than nothing, but they're not professionals. Our employees, our teachers and custodial staff, CMP secretaries, whoever is manning that is not a professional. And so that's why I say it's just not enough. That's less than a Band-Aid on this problem.
So we also know that that in school systems across the country, that teachers are being armed, with guns. And, I don't think that is, I think it's going to do more harm than good, that because, the teacher, it's like they're wearing different hats, they got to be the instructor and, quote unquote, the babysitter. And now they have to act like they're law enforcement too. It's too much. And they're not being paid for the amount of pressure and the amount of stress that they're going through. I don't know if something like that has been talked about here in the state of Alabama, but I know in quite a bit of states across the country, that has been the case, to where there was passed legislation that give the ability for teachers to arm themselves.
Yeah, and that is appalling to me. And you have to remember, I'm also a parent of teachers, and the thought of them working in that kind of environment and being asked to do that, I can't speak for my own children, but I just do not feel at all that they would want to do that. But knowing that we have a problem getting toner, to our teachers, getting paper to our teachers so they can make copies. Professional developments often are just a joke. So what? Now we're going to train teachers to carry their guns. Okay, are you going to buy them their bullets? I mean, our teachers now at the beginning of the year, when they're asking for all the stuff they need from parents, which, by the way, they shouldn't have to ask for, now they're going to add bullets to it. I mean, what? It's just insane to me that they even consider anything like that, because, our teachers, they are faced with situations like with parents, very upset parents that will threaten them, students that will kick them, students that will hit them. They're put in situations all the time that, I shouldn't say that. Teachers, especially in certain districts, will find themselves often in confrontational situations. And what they're always told is to go to your administrator. They're not to handle a child. They're not to, handle a parent, for God's sakes. So now all of a sudden they can pull a gun on them if they feel, it's just asking them to make.
Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. Like, if a teacher gets in a confrontation with a parent, or a student, somebody may, pull a gun out on them.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
it's
you
just,
have more, and that school will have more than they can handle.
yes.
Uh,
And look at all the mistakes that police make, dire mistakes. You could say assassinations in many cases, right? I mean, the police are trained, and look at some of the horrific things, whether by choice, through bias, or just an honest accident, people end up getting killed, murdered, whatever you want to say. So if they are having those difficulties and it's their profession, what do we expect our teachers to do? I just,
right.
I think I can't believe anyone is taking that seriously. And I do believe some sort of legislation has already been passed in one state. I can't remember now what, but there is a state already that is allowing teachers to carry.
So one of the example of a mistake that police made, especially in regards to mass shootings that occurred in school, was back on May 24th in Uvalde, Texas.
Yep.
That was utter disaster.
Yep.
Uh,
Here's the thing that I'm not hearing a lot about, and that is the confusion between the school police force and the city police force, because I guess they actually have, what was he, chief of the school police officers, and he didn't see it as his job. He felt like, this was a bigger thing that the police had to handle. And so he thought they were in charge. They thought he was in charge. And that's why, the time lapse happened where those poor children and those adults bled out and died, because there was confusion as to who's in charge. And that's exactly why we need to clarify that there are security people on the property that are trained and know to refer things to the police or to do, there has to be plans on everybody's part. But to have just this little school police task force and just let them kind of do whatever, obviously he had never been told what to do in the case of an intruder in a mass shooting. So he just automatically assumed, they probably handle, fist fights between the kids. They probably handle an irate parent coming up that's unarmed. I think that was way out of and this is just me, from what I've heard, I feel like the gentleman felt like it was way out of his realm and that it was the city police's job. And so that's another problem with us not taking this serious and just throwing, solutions at problems without really studying the effect of those so-called solutions. And that's why so many of those children and those two teachers suffer so terribly in Evolve.
so what are they like pointing the blame at each other? So, I mean, what's going on with that? Because I haven't heard anything in regards to that shooting since so you had some police officers that was on administrative leave. You had the police chief that's on administrative leave, and so far I have not heard anything
I don't think
after that.
Yeah, I don't think there's been any announcements yet. There are a lot. And I believe that the federal government, I don't know if it's Congress or who, but in DC, they're looking at it as well. And
so what happened over the weekend, President Biden had signed a pivotal piece of gun control legislation over the weekend, and that includes pumping millions of dollars into providing mental health and security for school systems. It's part of a $13 billion package over 10-year period. Now, locally, of course, in the city of Birmingham, they passed the budget today, and technically the $1 million that the school system is supposed to get, again, for the second year in a row, is supposed to go to mental health. So, I mean, so what do you think about that?
I would be very curious to see what they got for their $1 million the first year. I mean, was that part of the discussion? I'll be honest with you. I have been out of town for the last few weeks, and I've been going like driving back roads all across the country and camping out and stuff. So I haven't had hardly any internet or cell service. So I have not really studied up yet on that or the abortion issues. So I don't know what that money is being used for at a federal level, but I will say that, here locally with the city council, did they give evidence of how it worked? What did they do with it? Where did that $1 million go last time? When the mayor first brought up the $1 million for mental health, I was on the board, and he wanted us to then give that $1 million to the Birmingham Ed Foundation and allowed them to do our mental health services. And I've spoken out very strongly against that. We need to be in charge of the mental health services in our schools because we know our students best. We know how things should work in our school system. And so to involve another entity, that's going to handle that portion of it, no, that makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, but I was kind of curious as to why the mayor and the city council would even suggest that.
Well, when we first got the what they call the ESSER money, the COVID relief money, each time they released some, it had like specific areas. And so I think it was the last release, at least while I was on the board, it was a big part of it to go to mental health. So what happened was the Ed Foundation presented to the superintendent and his cabinet a plan that would cost $15 million for mental health services for our children. And it's my understanding that the cabinet and the superintendent at the time felt like, why would we give you $15 million? This is our job. We need to do this, and we need to make sure it's done right. So that's when then the mayor came back and said, okay, because we weren't giving the $15 million to the Birmingham Ed Foundation, then he said, okay, well, I'll give you $1 million, but it's going to be for mental health services. You need to put it with the $15 million and give it to the Birmingham Ed Foundation. And we were like, no, so I was proud of the superintendent and his cabinet for standing firm. But with the $1 million we did end up getting, I don't know what happened to it then, and I don't know what's going to happen to this.
So, I mean, they haven't really, during the budget hearings, no one from Birmingham City Schools actually was present at the public hearing. There was 2 of them. So there's really no report as to, what they have done with that $1 million. But the fiscal year 2023 budget, of course, they're going to get another $1 million, and that is towards, mental health. So I don't know if there's a lack of transparency that's going on, what have you, but I think that, any entity that's getting, city funds should have some level of transparency.
And so here's the interesting thing. I can say this now. When I was first on the board, that was, 2017, and that's when the mayor won his first, election to become mayor. And he had vowed to give us $10 million. Well, while he was running. Well, quickly it went from 3.6 million, which was what we had gotten under the previous mayor. It went down to 3 million. And then the whole time they were justifying reducing our money because they said that the school system was not cooperating. They wanted an invoice and they wanted it a certain time. Well, the previous mayor had a different kind of understanding. And so they continued to do it the way the previous mayor wanted it to be done. Well, once they said what their expectations were, which it was like pulling teeth, They didn't want to tell us exactly what they wanted. They wanted to be able to keep complaining about what they weren't getting. So what I did was I got with a few of the counselors that I talked to, and I'm getting together with the superintendent and everything. And I'm like, why? Why is this not happening? And it's like, they're asking for an invoice and they want it by a certain time. Well, yeah, we just never did that. Okay, but can we? Of course we can do that. So when we started doing it the way they wanted it, they had to come up with other complaints. And so then those complaints were, well, we don't want to give you money for that. Okay, tell us what you want us to give, to earmark the money with. So they drug their feet and drug their feet. And I told the few counselors that I talked with about, no, you all are getting the invoice, because they're being told from the mayor's office they're not getting that invoice. And so I had the paper trail and everything. And I kept trying to tell the counselors, listen, there's a problem here, because we're willing to do whatever you need for us to get the money for, the things we need. And it was constant confusion, and that was on purpose. It was very much on purpose. And so then it got down to 0, and now it's back to 1 million for help. Well, it's funny how now all the conversations over these invoices and all that has just gone away. It's very interesting to me. So it's obvious at the time they didn't have the control over whatever in the school system they needed control over, whether it was the superintendent, the cabinet, I don't know what, but obviously for some reason the mayor did not want the school system to have that money, and inaccuracies were given to city councilors. And I think some of the city councilors enjoyed not knowing the truth. I think they wanted to just bury their head. Well, the mayor said blah, blah, blah. Well, okay, but I'm giving you evidence of this. They didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to get involved. So, the mayor's giving us $1 million now. Yay. Like, what can you do with that?
So I think one of the conversations was, in not giving the money was, something to do with security. He said, I'm not giving you any money, just to be used, for security. But now that we're dealing with, X number of school shootings, and guns being on campus, isn't it by time that we've revisited it? Now, keep in mind, I know you was out of town, but there was an incident a couple of weeks ago before the end of the academic year that they caught a student at Winona with a gun on campus.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, I know about that. And so I forget what your question was. What was your question there?
Well, I mean, I didn't ask a question yet. I was just, I was just making a few comments.
Yeah.
I was just making a few comments about, some things that happened recently.
Yeah. Yeah, it has. I believe Dr. Sullivan really wants to curtail this. He asked AFT, hey, can you all help? This is an issue that we need to be addressing. But like I said, really, we can try to work with our children, and we should be. But this is the community. The community is sick.
I know what the question was.
Yes.
I remember what the question was. So to reiterate, a couple of years ago, before the school system got $0 in the budget, I think it was fiscal year 2021, if I'm not mistaken, that the whole conversation was, I'm not giving you money because
security,
spending it on security.
Yes. Okay.
But now that we have X amount of school shootings, and it seems like it's becoming a normal thing, isn't it by time that we revisit it as a city?
Absolutely. And the thing is that conversation, though, around security, it was because that money was being used to pay the salary of some of our resource officers that are hired by Birmingham City Schools. So basically our own security, and that's where that money was going. And with the previous mayor, that was the understanding. The money was pretty much the same every year and went for the same things. And everybody seemed fine with that. But all of a sudden, when the new mayor came and many, many new people on the city council, then all of a sudden, we don't want this money going towards salaries. Okay. I mean, the thing is that the foundation program that gives us teacher units and nurse units and all this kind of stuff, it only pays for certain things, certain salaries. Any other salaries that are not under the foundation program has to come out of the general fund. And so, you know, it's scary when a school system is dipping into their general fund to pay salaries, because the general fund, you know, is used for so many things. And so if the mayor was willing to give us money to pay our security people, we didn't see a problem with it. But obviously some city councilors and the mayor decided, no, I don't care if you've been doing it for 6 years or whatever it is, it's going to stop. And so, yeah, I mean, and it's the same with the mental health. Well, I bet that $1 million for mental health is going towards salaries. I mean, they are getting more counselors and they're getting more psychiatrists. And, you know, so I do know that the number of both of those are going up. And so what's this $1 million for, you know, mental health being used towards?
Right, so I don't know, you know, with that new law that's being signed by President Biden over the weekend, perhaps the city can go after some of that federal money that can go towards school security.
Yeah, I would certainly hope so. And like I said, we, you know, need to be following up. We do have a new chief operations officer in Birmingham City Schools. Right now, Dr. Alexander, who's currently in that position, is kind of mentoring the new COO that's coming in. And so we need to be asking them, though, about security and what the money is going towards that we were given, because we were supposed to be getting those security bubbles in every school. Some of the schools already have them, you may have noticed, but there's just many that do not. And
can you talk about what is the present security plan that Birmingham City Schools have?
So I'm not sure what you mean. I mean, they, you know, there's the SROs.
What type of security that the schools have?
Well, it was still the last I knew, and it maybe has changed. But, you know, we do have metal detectors, and in our high schools, every high school is supposed to have a SRO. And then in the middle schools, there are SROs, but they're shared from what I understand. And so they'll travel throughout the day to different middle schools, and there are none in the elementary schools. So besides the SROs and metal detectors, keeping doors locked, you know, they do have the computerized system now where you have to show driver's license, they'll print off a little sticker with your face on it saying, you know, you're approved to be in the building that day. And that they're supposed to keep that database. So like if you've already done it and you go back to the school, then they should just be able to pull you up in their file, run off the little sticker and give it to you. So there is a little bit of you know, checks going on there with that. If every school has their badge maker and are following the procedures. But there's too many entry points in too many of our schools. So it makes it very difficult. You know, supposedly there's supposed to be alarms on the doors, but too many people don't take it serious and they prop the doors open or they deactivate the alarms. So what good is it? So there's a lot more that could be done.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, that's enough or
I'm having a hard time hearing you. There's a lot of wind in your microphone.
do you think that's enough, or there needs to be more security?
Oh, no, I don't think it's enough. My own personal feeling, we need to finish all those security bubbles. We need to put fencing up around every school, and we need to hire professional security people. You know, we need to make sure we have cameras throughout the schools, aimed at doors. The doors need to be alarmed, and they need to be screening everybody that's coming in. There should only be one door during the day of people coming and going. And they should have security officers monitoring that, just like we do in our banks, just like we do in our airports, just like, hell, on the streets. There's some places on the street with more cameras than our schools have. You know, it's like, why do we not value our children more than that? Why do we not value public education more than that? One person has some kind of a shoe bomb like thing, and look at all of the changes in security in our airlines. You know, 9/11, tragic and awful. They made changes in travel because of it. Well, how many children have to die? I mean, what's the number? You know, what's going to make them take action and make sure all our schools are safe? And it's sad that. Yeah, your wind is still loud, so I can't hear you. Sounds like you're in a tornado.
Yeah. In 2025, I mean, in this year alone, there's been 25 school shootings in this year alone.
25?
Yes, 25 this year alone.
School shootings?
That includes the one in Texas that happened on May 24th.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, I just, you know, I think a lot of people felt when Sandy Hook happened, and then something's going to change now. And when it didn't, I think it was pretty apparent that people just don't value our public schools and our students and the employees there, because it's just continuing over and over and over again. And there's been really nothing done.
So these folks are just basically bought and paid for by organizations like the NRA. You know, that they're being paid to just sit there and be quiet.
Well, I mean, at the federal level, you know, I have no doubt that the NRA, they have a strong lobby. And so I have no doubt that they're playing a role in this. Maybe, you know, I don't know if you could say it's intentional or just stupidity, or I don't know, but, you know, that's a huge problem we have, is with that gun lobby. And they're, you know, preventing sensible things from being put in place. And it's just getting crazier and crazier.
But it's just like you said, how many kids have to die before we address, you know, this problem? 19 children and 2 teachers was killed.
Yep. And then what about the mental health of these children? You know, I encourage everybody to look up some of the Columbine survivors and hearing how, you know, they have done in becoming adults and raising their own kids. And, you know, there's mental health issues. You know, it's tragic that we lose the children, but in truth, we've lost even more than the ones that died, because the others, you know, are so traumatized and have such deep mental health issues from it that, you know, people aren't realizing the effect this has on the, you know, community as a whole, and the ability for some of these victims that survive to be productive. You know, I can't imagine going through a trauma like that and, you know, not getting the mental health services you need, which all too often school systems don't have the funding for that because it's not a priority. So, thank God for the parents that can afford to get their children counseling. But too many of them just have to work it through themselves.
So if you was head of Birmingham City Schools, what would security be like?
Oh,
If Terry Michaels was head of Birmingham City Schools.
Well, I done told you what I would have done. I want fences around the schools. I want, once that school bell rings, for all the, entrances into the schools to be monitored by security cameras and only have one where people are supposed to come and go from. I want us to have security cameras all over. And I want to have professional security guards at the building that's their only job, is to keep the perimeter safe, to keep people with bad intentions from getting into the schools, just like they do at airports, just like they do at banks, just like they do in other places. I would definitely, we need the security bubbles in all of them. I really kind of think it's a good idea also for those folks that know they're going to be coming to our schools to have to go through central office and, get a background check and get their ID from there. Like I said, we did that in Tampa. It takes some getting used to, and people don't like change. But if we can't get this gun problem solved, that's the hard part. Well, we're just going to sit here and say, well, it's the communities, it's poverty, it's mental health, it's not our schools, so we're not going to harden our schools. That's insane to me, because the other problems aren't getting solved. And so we need to protect our children now. And I feel it can be done in a way that the schools will not at all feel like a prison. We can do it in a way where our children and our employees will feel safe and therefore can concentrate on teaching and learning.
Do you think they're going to have a conversation, about this in sometime in the near future?
Birmingham City in particular?
Yes.
No. Like I said,
why you say that?
Well, we already had these conversations. They're supposed to be putting security bubbles in all the buildings. Where's that? Has that happened? I am devoted to this school system, and I don't want to say, negative, derogatory things about the school system, but I will say that there's things that have been promised that will get done for security that's not getting done. And so, I don't know if the topic's ever going to be taken seriously. I just don't.
God forbid if we had another incident like happened in Texas.
Yeah, right.
We definitely don't want to see that here in Birmingham.
Well, I want to reiterate that the superintendent is very concerned, and that's one of the things at top of his list. But even though he's the superintendent, he doesn't work independently. He doesn't just wave his magic wand and things happen like he wants it to. So I don't want anyone to take this in any way that I am bad-mouthing, the superintendent, but it's a huge machine. And, it's not just him saying, make it so, and it happens. There's a board of 9 people. There's, contractors, and I mean, so many moving pieces that is difficult to do. But I will be following up with Dr. Alexander before he leaves and ask him about the security bubbles, about how many have been done so far. Because we had a time frame, we had a priority on certain schools. I mean, we had a plan, and I'm just not convinced that's happening.
I remember when I was going to public schools that, we didn't have resource officers. So when I first heard that resource officers was going to the schools, I said, what the hell is a resource officer?
Mm-hmm.
Because when I was in school, you didn't have, resource officers. You know what we had? Number one, we had people that care. And number two, we had that paddle.
You had badass APs and principals that beat your butt with that paddle, right?
Oh yeah, not only that, you got gym teachers, you got PE teachers,
So
You know, all dean, like at Parker, you know, when I was there, you know, we had two deans. We
mm,
had one for girls and we had one for boys. And of course, one of them was Bishop Calvin Woods.
mm,
So he,
yeah,
you know, he was the dean of boys at the time that I was there.
yeah,
That's how I first. That's when I first, you know, met him.
yep,
And I think at one time we, you know, also had Larry Langford, who
mhm,
served as a dean at one time, you know, as
yep,
well. And that's how I, you know, met him. And these were no nonsense people. You know,
mhm,
they demand attention. You
yep,
know, if they say 10 hut, you're gonna stand up straight.
yeah, yeah,
So at that time, we didn't have a lot of the problems that, you know, schools has today in
right.
terms of security, you know, is
Well,
concerned. And we certainly didn't have any resource officers either. So when
yeah,
I first heard about that, I said, what the hell is a resource officer?
right. Yeah, but so we have to remember, and I know, Richard Franklin with Birmingham AFT, he's always very good at saying this. Our schools are just a reflection of our communities. So when our communities are so in crisis, when we have so many people in our city in crisis, then that feeds into the schools, because those people that are in crisis have children. That causes the children to be living in trauma and in crisis and in poverty and whatever it is. Then they come into our schools. And so, things have changed. And I, not commenting on paddling or not, but whatever it was we did in the past, it's not the past, it's now. And our communities are much more fragmented and isolated. And so our schools are now also becoming just an island in isolation. And we got a lot of hurt kids, and hurt people. And so, I just think that what's supposed to happen, because I hear a lot in the Black community and in predominantly Black school systems, and listening to employees and to parents, and I know this as well, that it's kind of divided as far as SROs go. Some people will yell, why don't we have resource officers? And other people will yell, resource officers are just treating our children like prisoners, and it's just getting them conditioned to be in prison. I get both sides of it, but the truth is, just like with the security measures I talk about, doing SROs the right way is a huge asset. They don't need to walk around in police clothes. They don't need to have the guns at their side. They don't need to carry around tasers and stuff. But they need to be trained in how to de-escalate with our children. They need to get to know our children. They need to be based at one school and one school only. So as the children matriculate and their brothers and sisters come up behind them, these resource officers will know these families. They need to be an extension of the administration. And if done correctly, they can help actually identify troubled children, children at risk of doing something to hurt themselves or others, because resource officers see a lot that maybe administrators and teachers don't see, because they have a different point of view. They're seeing the children in different settings. And, like outside before they come in for school, or, if they're all eating in a, what's that called? Like if they're all eating outside, for some special reason, they got these outdoor picnic tables and stuff, the kids are eating out there. Well, the resource officers would be around, and they would, see how the kids interact away from the administrators and teachers. So the SROs have an entirely different point of view. And so they're very valuable. I really don't want to see them leave. And that was one thing I talked about when I ran for re-election. I didn't want people to think that I want cops up in there with their badges and their navy blue and their belt with all their stuff. We need real SROs that are trained.
Because that kind of, don't you think that kind of like intimidate kids?
Oh, yeah.
Put them in, because I know it myself. I get nervous around, I get nervous around any type of law enforcement.
Yeah, it definitely can. And, don't get me wrong. We've had a lot of SROs that are in their police uniforms and all that have been able to bond with the kids. I know quite a bit about like Parker High School. and the SROs that used to be there. And, they were a huge benefit to the teachers and, to the parents and families because they helped keep peace. They were not there to catch kids, smoking pot, in a little enclave over there where nobody can see them, or in the bathrooms. They weren't, there to arrest kids for things.
Right, because I've seen some SRO officers, they roll up in these schools like they're regular cops.
Yeah, and you can't have that attitude. You can't. You've got to be an extension of the school, not an extension of the police department. Our kids don't need policed at school, but our employees and our administration needs help in de-escalating situations. And, the last incident that I know of that happened at Parker, it was very disappointing to me because it took so long for the SROs to get there. And because it took them so long to get there, adults had to step in and do the job of the SROs. And now some of them are at risk, from what I understand, with their employment. And so, that just can't happen. We need our SROs to be there to do the things that only an SRO can do.
You mean like teachers and staff members?
Right. They should never, and as a union person, we train or we advise our members in never handling a child.
See, that's what I'm talking about. They expect the teachers to take on more than what they're supposed to be, paid
Exactly.
by. They got to be an instructor, mentor, counselor, parent, and now, law enforcement.
Law enforcement, right?
Can't do that.
No,
That's just impossible. They can't do all that and effectively teach. That's just not possible.
No, it's not.
That's just like a police officer. I keep saying that in certain areas like mental health, they're not trained and dealing with mental health, especially as someone that is mentally incapacitated, because we've seen all the time that when a person is mentally incapacitated and they meet law enforcement, they either get shot or they end up getting killed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because the police officers, all they want to do is de-escalate the situation, but they in fact made it a whole lot worse because they're not trained in dealing with mental health. And unfortunately, I don't see anything that they're doing to keep the peace neither.
Yeah, and that's why, I always talk about supporting the true SROs, because they should be getting training on being in a school, how to interact with the children, how to de-escalate with, 13 and 14-year-olds. That's far different than how they would de-escalate out on the street somewhere. And so, our whole goal is to keep our children in school. We want them in school. And so, we need to be able to identify these issues. And that's what an SRO is supposed to be helping with, is identifying issues with the children so it can get addressed so no one gets expelled or sent to Doobie.
Are there any racial is there a correlation between race and school shootings?
I don't believe so. I don't think so. Well, actually, as we all know, a majority of the mass shootings are done by white men. And so now, as far as who the victims are, is it more Black students and white students? I don't think there's any correlation for the victims, none that I've seen. But, definitely we all know, and, who's doing the shooting. A large majority of the time, it's white males that do the mass shootings. And if you look at school shootings, a lot of the white men that are doing this, many of them have issues with the schools and with bullying. And so if, that's again, where the counselors, the administrators, the SROs, they can work together to truly help minimize bullying, so that a child, once they graduate, won't turn around and come back and retaliate in any way.
So it is locally, has that been a problem in Birmingham City schools? Bullying, has that's been a major problem?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know because here's the thing. When I actually started doing this back in 2012, it was because of a student being bullied. She had gotten beaten up in the bathroom at a high school in Huntsville. And she went and tried to get help. And at first the principal was helpful, but once it got to central office, the superintendent heard about it. Then he's like, oh, they were just horse playing, it's fine. So they wouldn't give her a transfer or anything. And she was daily being bullied by these people because, as you can imagine, they beat her once and got away with it. So, so she was in danger. And that's why I got started, was because of the bullying. Now, there's something that a lot of people don't know about, and it's going to sound crazy, but hang in there with me. There is the Student Harassment Prevention Act from 2009. It's a law that our legislature passed in 2009. It now has a different name, but when I started, that was the long name. And what it says is that there is supposed to be forms in every single school for children and or parents or guardians to fill out if there's been an incident of bullying or harassment or violence or whatever. And the law states that guardians, parents, children are to be made aware of this law and be made aware of these forms and where they're at. Now, I know some people look at me like I am crazy, like a dang form. Are you kidding me? But here's the difference. If you truly want something to happen in public education as a parent or guardian, you got to get it in writing. These principals, these administrators, they'll talk to you all day long, but nothing will happen. And when parents would come to me in the beginning, when I was working with children that were bullied, I would tell them that form is important because now you have a paper trail. And if they don't do anything, you can escalate it. You can escalate it all to the State Department, all the way to the State Department of Education. People don't realize that. So you are going to get help with your problem if you continue to put everything in writing and start at the base with the principal. Then go to the principal's boss. Eventually you get to superintendent, nothing's still happening. You go to the State Department of Education. So that's why that paperwork is so important. Because they'll say, I never said that. I don't remember meeting with them. They didn't call me. Well, when you have this form, it's documented. So I do encourage parents and guardians and children that are experiencing bullying anywhere in an Alabama public school to be sure and get those forms and fill those out. You think that's crazy, probably, don't you?
No. I mean, a lot of people know me is that, I'm big on transparency. And sometimes, that requires a paper trail. And then sometimes that will require your voice, to actually hold people accountable. So yeah, I don't think that's crazy. I think that's spot on.
Yeah. So, I mean, you'll still request a meeting with the teacher and or the principal or the AP, whoever you need to meet with. You're still going to have those meetings. But you're going to follow it up with paperwork per the meeting today, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you document. Dodgy Hendricks always said that documentation saved the nation. And, she's right. Documentation is everything. Now,
right. Because they could say, I didn't do this. I didn't say that. I'm like, well, yes, you got it. I got it on paper.
Right. Yeah.
I got it on paper because I get all the time, people would tell me that, I didn't get an email. I said, well, yes, you did, because in Google, for example, everything is time stamped. I can tell you the day that I sent it. I can tell you the time that I sent it. And I can tell you exactly what I said.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an important piece. Yeah. It really is.
I get it.
Yeah.
I totally get it.
Yeah, so I don't encourage parents not to speak up, or guardians. You've got to have those face-to-face meetings, but you have to have all that paperwork documenting it. Because also, all through Alabama, school systems have to report how many incidents they have in their schools. And, that includes, bullying and fighting and guns and knives and any kind of incident like that. There is a check mark for it. And then they send those numbers to the State Department of Education. So if they know this paperwork is out there saying that this incident happened, then they better have those numbers correlate. Because that's one thing that Huntsville, when I was in Huntsville, they fudged those numbers all the time. Now, they have different superintendent, maybe fine now, I don't know, but that's how I learned about bullying and documentation and how important those numbers are to a school system. They want to keep those numbers low. And so, you know, they don't always handle all the situations, but get it in writing. You know.
Okay, I think that we're gonna wrap it up here. And before we go, is there any words of encouragement that you like to give to parents and students who have been involved or been a victim of a mass shooting? Do you have any words of encouragement?
You know, all we can do as traumatic and hurtful and terrible these incidents are, we owe it to the people that are losing their lives to try to create change. And it's exhausting. It really is exhausting. But if we want, in particular, if we're talking about school violence, if we want our schools to be safer, people have got to be involved and they've got to be voicing their opinions. I would love for everybody to come together and start asking Birmingham City Schools about the security bubbles. I mean, that's a start. We have to use our voices and we have to identify troubled children. And stop them from continuing down a path that might lead to harm of someone else. And that's where the mental health services come in. That was a big platform for me. So, you know, I really encourage people. It's hard for our children who are living in trauma to perform at a high level. And part of improving our schools is addressing their trauma and mental health services. So, you know, we need parents, you know, to talk with counselors, principals, teachers, and together as a team, we can get a child help. I have on an individual basis, I've had teachers call me and say they feel like a child isn't getting whatever services they need. And I have gotten involved when I was a board member. I would call the correct departments. I would talk to the superintendent. And I did help make sure that certain children that were identified as being, you know, a potential danger to themselves or others really got the help that they needed. And, you know, so you've just got to keep plugging away and pushing. But really, like I said in the beginning, it's a community illness. And it's hard for us to correct it at a school level without community help. But we've got to keep trying. We have to. Our children are worth it. So I don't know how helpful any of that is, but the paperwork, fill out the paperwork. Student Harassment Prevention Act of 2009. And what I can do, if you would like, is send you the link for that information.
Okay. Yeah, I know this is a rather touchy subject, and not to mention controversial, but again, like I said, we have to have these tough love conversations.
Yep.
And that's what I bring to the table as a podcaster. It's about time that we bring those hard conversations to light.
Yeah, because, you know, especially, you know, challenging people who say they don't want our schools hardened and they don't want our schools like prisons. Well, they have no imagination or they're just ignorant. And I don't mean that in a, you know, negative way, in the true sense of the word. You know, I've traveled all across this country visiting schools and so many school systems, and I've seen what can work. And
yeah, so I keep hearing about the school to prison pipeline and all that.
Yeah. Yes, and that's real, and that is real. But what really adds to that school to prison pipeline is doing SROs the wrong way. Mm-hmm. Having, you know, just cops up in there and treating the kids like they're bad before they've even done anything. You know, I mean, that's where we really need to have trained SROs in our schools. The physical aspect of the building and the security involved will not make those children feel like they're in prisons. What will make them feel like they're in prisons? Police officers and other people treating them like they deserve to be in prison. That's what's negative. Not having fences, not having security cameras. It's all in
Yeah,
the
right. So that's basically what the kids at Huffman High School were saying a couple of years ago when Courtney Harrington was, that's what they was telling me. And so
Yeah.
that was one of the questions, that I asked, that if you have adequate security in your school, would you feel like you are in a prison? And a lot of them said no.
Well,
In fact, some of them said that by doing that, they actually care about.
yeah, and that's what our children need. They need to feel safe and they need to feel loved. And
So
if you
the question
do it,
is, are we going to listen to them? Because they're and they said the same thing a couple of months ago when I participated in a forum at Parker High School. They kept saying the same thing. So
yes,
they're crying out for help.
exactly.
The question is, are we going to listen to them?
To them, the people on the front lines. And that's what, the event that you held, I watched online, and it just really, really inspired me to want to get the children, the students, more guidance in how they can lead this initiative, because to tell you the truth, it would be more powerful coming from them. So I did reach out to the Philadelphia Student Union, because they're an amazing student union, and they do train, I don't know if train's the right word, but help and educate other students and other school systems on how to mount these grassroots campaigns to get what they need in their schools. And I never heard back from them. So I probably should try again. But yeah, I mean, right now, what really needs to happen is those students that are feeling moved by this and they want change and they're willing to step up, is we need to give them the guidance and help them get organized. The adults, they're so used to hearing us complain. To have the children get organized and say enough is enough, we don't want to die in our schools and we deserve to feel safe, I think that will bring change quicker than anything.
Yeah, because over time there has been some walkouts and some protests, by students, and they're saying some of the same things, that you have mentioned. So
And Journey for Justice, Brother Jitu, he's been here to Birmingham a couple of times. I've arranged for him to come. He's from Chicago. His organization is Journey for Justice. And we spent quite a bit of time a few years back over at Jackson Owen. And the rapport that he had with the children was just so incredible. And we were hoping to be able to build on that. But we haven't been able to bring him back again, pandemic and everything. But that's what I think our students need, is some guidance. People don't automatically know how to do this stuff. And you know that because you're an amazing organizer, grassroots organizer, and you know that, there's a learning curve. We've got to have people already in that position to help guide us and mentor us. It's not just natural. And so our students need some mentors and some guidance on how to create real change in their schools. I think if they were to do that, honest to goodness, I believe it would happen.
Okay, any last words before we close?
No, well, except for about the petition. We didn't talk about charter schools today. So I just want to remind you the petition. That's the one thing that's frustrating, is we know, you and I and many others know how the communities feel about charter schools, but then we go and we put out this petition and it just doesn't get much interest. And if we could get more interest in that petition, I think that is really our only hope in getting the changes that the community wants concerning, in this particular case, a charter school in Titusville. So if we could maybe start pushing that again and see if we could get more people to sign on, that would be great. I'll always send that link too.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you,
I know
Chief, for
it's been kind of
everything.
rainy and stormy on, my end, something that I didn't expect,
Oh,
but
it is raining.
I love to be outdoors.
Yeah. Yeah, it is raining. I didn't even realize it, but yeah. So, but thank you for all that you do. And thank you for, asking me to come. And I'm sorry that we had to keep rescheduling, but thanks for hanging in there with me.
Oh, yeah,
For
that's
everything
okay.
you
I mean,
do.
I end up having, I end up having a great broadcast on yesterday. So I kind of like raised the awareness of school shootings and
Mm.
gave a lot of statistical information
Yeah.
and has some great analysis of that information,
Mm.
and gave two important links to where people can go to actually get more information, because I think when we go to these different protests and marches and you hear a lot of statistics, pretty much they're getting that information from somewhere.
Yeah.
So obviously they've been
Yeah.
doing a lot of homework,
Yeah.
in regards. So just kind of like encouraging people, like, if you want to know more statistically about what's going on, that
Yep.
you go to these particular websites. And it turned out to be a great substitute. So
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, that's awesome, because our passion and our emotion is very important, but also to be able to have that data to back up what we're saying, then they can't ignore you. So that's
Right.
awesome. So did you
Right.
share those links? Did you put them on your page or anything?
Yeah, actually I put it on I actually put it on not my personal Facebook page, but the podcast Facebook
The
page.
podcast. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, Australian broadcast section.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll
So
check
I put
those
it on
out.
there. So I put it on there, and the video is posted already. I did the broadcast from my phone, so if you see like little mistakes here and here and there, because I was trying to share my screen.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well,
I haven't got that down pat yet, but I think for the amount of time that was spent on that episode, I think I did pretty well. The information
yeah.
was very thorough.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm going to take a look at it, and I'll also send you the links to those things I talked about as well.
Okay, thank you. And I'll make sure that I would post it along with this podcast episode.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
And for that, we're gonna wrap up here. Thank you so much for being a part
Of course.
this experience. Of course, this Independence Day is coming up. This weekend is coming up. It's Independence Day weekend. So we will not have any podcast episodes being produced.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And enjoy your weekend, and I pray that everybody stays safe.
Same here. And our next podcast, of course, will be on July the 8th. So I hope that you will join us then. So until then, have a great evening.
All right, you too. Thank you.